You sent the last message 3 days ago. No response. And you've been sitting with a particular kind of discomfort since then, the kind that comes from genuinely not knowing whether to reach out again or whether reaching out again is exactly the wrong move. So you've done something that felt almost unnatural, almost like fighting your own instincts. You stopped. You stopped texting first. You stopped initiating plans. You stopped doing the thing you've always done when you like someone, which is pursue. And now you're wondering what's happening on her end, whether your silence reads as confidence or indifference, whether stepping back is going to bring her closer or push her further away, whether she's even noticed at all. What most people don't realize is that what happens in a woman's mind when a man stops chasing her is almost nothing like what either popular dating advice or basic intuition would suggest. It isn't a simple psychological trick, and it isn't simply that she'll miss the attention and come running back. The actual internal process is more layered, more honest, and ultimately more revealing about the nature of attraction itself than most people ever stop to consider. Stay with me here. To understand what actually happens when pursuit stops, you first have to understand what constant pursuit communicates, often unintentionally, in the first place. When someone is chasing consistently, reaching out first every time, planning every interaction, managing the emotional temperature of the connection without much reciprocal effort, it sends a specific message, even if that's never the intention. It says, I need this more than you do. And while that might feel romantic from the inside, from her side, it often registers, consciously or not, as an imbalance. Not necessarily unattractive in the moment, but subtly destabilizing over time, because relationships built on uneven effort tend to create an uneven sense of value. This is where things become interesting. When you stop chasing, the first thing that happens inside her mind is not relief, and it's usually not immediate longing either. It's something quieter and more diagnostic, a kind of internal noticing. Think about it. We don't typically notice the absence of something we weren't paying attention to in the first place. The fact that she notices the change in your behavior at all tells you something important. It means your presence had already registered as something with weight. Even if she hadn't fully processed how much, there is something deeper happening here. The second thing that happens is that she begins, often involuntarily, to test the silence. She might wait a day longer than usual before reaching out to see if you'll initiate. She might reread your last few messages, looking for some shift in tone she missed. This isn't calculated manipulation on her part. It's closer to a kind of unconscious data collection, her mind trying to determine what the change in your behavior actually means. Is this a loss of interest, a shift in priorities, or something else entirely? What most people don't realize is that this uncertainty produces genuine psychological activation, the kind of low-grade tension that occurs whenever a previously predictable pattern suddenly changes without explanation. Now we move deeper. The third thing that happens, and this is where the conversation starts to challenge a popular but oversimplified narrative, is that she begins evaluating her own investment in the connection, separate from yours. This is crucial. When pursuit was constant, she may not have needed to ask herself how much she actually wanted this, because the momentum was being supplied externally. The moment that supply pauses, she's left facing the connection on its own terms, without your effort propping it up. And in that space, she has to actually feel into what she wants, independent of what you've been offering. For some women, this reveals genuine interest that was simply obscured by the comfort of being pursued. For others, it reveals that the interest was never as deep as the constant attention made it seem. We'll come back to why that distinction matters enormously. But before we go there, consider the fourth thing. She often begins to reassess your value through a different lens entirely, one rooted in scarcity rather than abundance. Human psychology, across both genders, tends to assign higher value to things that are not freely or constantly available. This isn't manipulation. It's simply how attention and desire function biologically. When something is always present, the mind stops actively evaluating it. When something becomes less certain, less automatic, the mind re-engages with evaluating its worth. Your withdrawal forces a kind of psychological recalculation that constant presence never required. This is where things become interesting. The fifth thing that happens, and this is the part that most discussions of this topic get fundamentally wrong, is that what she feels in response to your withdrawal depends entirely on what was actually there beneath your previous pursuit. If your chasing was rooted in genuine connection, real compatibility, and consistent character, your stepping back creates space for her to miss something real. The absence reveals genuine value. But if your previous pursuit was the primary source of whatever spark existed, if the connection was mostly being generated by your effort rather than something mutual and substantive, your withdrawal won't create longing. It will simply reveal that there wasn't much substance to miss in the first place. There is something deeper happening here, beneath even that distinction. The sixth thing that happens, often arriving alongside the recalculation we just described, is that she begins, almost despite herself, replaying specific memories rather than general impressions. This is an important distinction. Vague, diffuse missing, the kind that says I sort of miss talking to him, is weak and easily overridden by a busy week or a distracting new interest. But specific memory, a particular conversation, a particular joke only the two of you would understand, the exact way you said something that stuck with her, carries far more psychological weight. Imagine this. Her mind isn't simply registering your absence as a category, it's returning to specific textured moments, the kind that can't be generated by anyone else, and noticing that those particular experiences have nowhere else to go now that the channel between you has gone quiet. When this specific kind of memory starts surfacing unprompted, you are no longer simply a person she occasionally thinks about. You have become attached to actual, irreplaceable content in her memory, and that is a far more durable form of presence than generalized fondness. What happens next is important because this is where the deepest truth of this entire conversation comes into focus. Here is what almost no one tells you about strategically stopping pursuit. It does not create attraction that wasn't already there. It reveals attraction that already existed but was being obscured by imbalance. Withdrawal is not a manufacturing process. It is a revealing process. If she has genuine feelings, genuine respect, genuine interest in who you actually are beneath the effort you were putting in, the silence will activate that interest, will make her reach toward you, will produce the noticing, the testing, the recalculation, the specific memory we've described. But if the connection was largely sustained by your one-sided effort, the silence will simply confirm to both of you that there wasn't enough real foundation underneath it. This reframes the entire premise that brought you here. Most people approach the question of stopping pursuit as a kind of tactic, a way to manufacture interest where it doesn't currently exist, a trick to make someone want you more through absence. But the deeper truth is that withdrawal only works as a clarifying tool, not a creating one. It cannot generate feelings that were never present. What it can do, and what it does reliably, is remove the distortion that constant pursuit creates. The distortion that makes genuine interest indistinguishable from polite tolerance of consistent attention. The seventh and final thing worth understanding ties everything together, and it concerns what happens to her own self-perception during this period of silence. When she notices herself missing specific moments, testing the quiet, reassessing your value, something subtle shifts in how she sees her own role in the connection. She stops being a passive recipient of your effort and starts becoming, often for the first time, an active participant who has to decide what she actually wants to do about the gap that's opened up. This shift matters enormously because relationships sustained entirely by one person's pursuit rarely produce real partnership. They produce a dynamic where one person leads and the other simply allows herself to be led. The silence forces a kind of agency back into her hands, and what she does with that agency, whether she steps forward or simply lets the connection fade, tells you something neither of you could have learned any other way. And this means the real value of stopping the chase isn't about winning her back through psychological strategy. It's about finally seeing the truth of the situation clearly without your own effort clouding the picture. When you stop chasing, you're not performing a trick designed to manipulate her feelings. You're removing your own behavior from the equation long enough to see what's actually there underneath it, both in her and in yourself. Because here's the question that actually matters, the one beneath the question you came here asking. You wanted to know what she thinks when you stop chasing her. But the more important question is this: what do you actually want to discover when the noise of your own effort goes quiet? Do you want to learn whether she genuinely values you, independent of what you're providing her? Or have you been using constant pursuit to avoid ever having to face that question directly? Because the silence isn't really about her. It's about your own willingness to find out the truth, even if the truth is uncomfortable. And that willingness, more than any tactic or strategy, is what separates a man who understands real connection from a man who is simply afraid to stop performing long enough to see what's actually real. If this opens something for you, there is much more to explore. Stay close.